Pelinal Whitestrake, the Star-Made Knight, remains in the pages of history, whether he stood as a mere mortal dedicated to a noble cause, or, as tales suggest, a legendary immortal hero and the nemesis of all elves, has been lost to the annals of history. Regardless of the reality, he fought alongside Alesia during a slave rebellion, slaying the sorcerer kings of the Aelid city-states in single combat, including Haramir of Copper and Tea, Gordor the Shaper, and the Fire King Hadhul. Hey everyone, my name's Jeremy, and today I present to you the story of the Divine Crusader, Pelinal Whitestrake, a man who potentially conquered all of Tamriel alone, and was responsible for the slaughtering of hundreds, even thousands of elves throughout both the Merethic era and the First era. Pelinal Whitestrake may well and truly be one of my favourite characters in the entirety of the Elder Scrolls lore, due to his intriguing narrative, wrapped in mysteries and accompanied by the interchanging of fact and myth throughout his story. In this video we delve into the intricate narrative of an individual, accountable for the widespread massacre of Mer, recognised as a Shezarene, and for dedicating himself entirely, sacrificing everything in achieving his goal. But before we begin, I would like to remind you that if you ever find yourself enjoying this video, then I would implore you to like the video, and if you would like to see more content like this, then consider subscribing. It would go a long way in supporting the channel. He was Pelinal the Whitestrake because of his left hand, made of a killing light. He was Pelinal the Bloody, for he drank it in victory. He was Pelinal Insurgent, because he gave the Crusades a face. He was Pelinal in Triumph, as the words eventually became synonymous, and men-at-arms gave thanks to the Eight when they saw his banner coming through war. He was Pelinal the Blamer, for he was quick to admonish those allies of his that favoured tactics that ran counter to his sword theory. And he was Pelinal the Third, because some said he was a god geyser, who had incarnated twice before already. Or, that simpler, he was the third vision given to Alesia in her prayers of liberation. The Aelids, also known as the Heartland High Elves, or Wild Elves, were the first race to establish an empire in Tamriel, and had ruled modern-day Cyrodiil for countless years, dating back to before recorded history. Like many of the races in Tamriel, enslavement was a large part in the development of their civilization. However, it was because of this same reason that would lead to the destruction of their empire, and eventually their race. It was only until a young woman, who was enslaved under the Aelids in the city of Sard, prayed to the Aedra. She prayed to the Eight Divines for the freedom of her people from their elvish oppressors, in which the formation of a rebellion would emerge. This young woman would soon become known as Alesia, the slave queen of Cyrodiil, mother of the empire. She was the one who would lead the rebellion against the Aelids, freeing men from the clutches of elves, and forming what would come to be known as the Alesian Empire, the First Empire. When Alesia prayed to the Divines, she spoke to Kine, the Nordic goddess of storm, widow of Shor, and the chief deity of the Nordic pantheon. Kine conversed with her, and during their exchange, granted her 3 divine visions. It is unknown what Alesia's first 2 visions were comprised of, perhaps visions of the winged bull demigod, Morrowind, or the formation of an empire. Her third vision, however, was of a symbol, a diamond soaked red with the blood of elves, whose facets could unsector and form into a man, whose every angle could cut her jailers, and a name, Pelinal, which is the Star-Made Knight, who was arrayed in armour from a future time. Alesia's third vision came to fruition when Pelinal Whitestrake wandered into a rebel camp, his divine armour immersed in blood. And Pelinal came to Alesia's camp of rebels, holding a sword and mace, both encrusted with the smashed viscera of elven faces, feathers, and magic beads, which were the markings of the Aeledun, stuck to the redness that hung from his weapons. And he lifted them, saying, these were their eastern chieftains, no longer full of their talking. His name, Pelinal, translates roughly to Glorious Knight. This name had come from a corruption of the Pelinal. That he took the name Pelinal was passing strange. That was an elvish name, and Pelinal was a scourge in that race, and not much given to irony. Pelinal was much too grim for that, Even in youth he wore white hair, and trouble followed him. Perhaps his enemies named Pelinal of their own in their tongue, but that is doubtful, for it means glorious knight, and he was neither to them. Throughout his involvement in the Alesian rebellion, he had become known under the aliases of many titles, such as Pelinal Insurgent, Pelinal the Bloody, Pelinal the Blamer, and Pelinal the Third. These are but a few of the names that had claimed him, with many more lost in time. Pelinal was an enemy of all Mer, very likely being the most intolerant and anti-elf individual in all of history. During these times, Pelinal slaughtered a great number of elves, even to the degree of mistaking the Khajiit for another strain of Aldmeri, killing a great number of them before his eventual realization, earning him the name Whitesnake by the Khajiiti people. This legendary immortal hero is said to have conquered all of Tamriel alone in the Merethic era, forming and building up kingdoms in different provinces. However, this was not done under a single banner, instead forming separate kingdoms and abandoning them after formation. This suggests that Pelinal was in fact attributed under many names, such as Harold Harrybriggs, Izmir, and Hans the Fox. All of these names he was aligned with were all believed to be Shezarines. The Shezarines are believed to be fabled heroes throughout the history of Tamriel, each of which sharing an affiliation with Lorkhan, or Shazar according to the Cyrodiilic version of the missing god. They are believed to be a mortal incarnation or an avatar of Lorkhan. The last of Pelinal's titles I mentioned, Pelinal III, sparks speculation of the meaning of the name. One theory is that he was given this title due to his association with a third vision granted to Alesia, while some hypothesize that he was the third reincarnation of the Shezarine. His involvement in the rebellion was consequential, as while Alesia and the first champion sent by the divines, Morohos, the winged bull, were important in fighting the vast numbers of the Aelids, Pelinal would take it upon himself to slay the sorcerer kings of the Aelids in pre-arranged duels rather than at war. He entered his first duel against the Aelid sorcerer king, Haramir of Copper and Tea. This battle would take place at Sancretor, the Golden Hill. It would be in this battle that Whitestrake would eat at Haramir's neck veins while screaming praise to Riemann, a name that no one knew yet. Yet the few who would remember this name would eventually discover that this was where Riemann's Cyrodiil, the first emperor of the Second Empire, would be found, on that hill with the Amulet of Kings, over 2,500 years from now, and for some reason, Pelinal knew that name. This is a key distinction that, combined with his armor from a future time and his hand of a killing light, suggests that Pelinal comes from the future, possibly the 4th or even 5th era, being sent back in time by the Aedra to fix mistakes of the past. Pelinal would go on to slay many more of the Aelid sorcerer kings. The head of Gordor, the Shaper, was smashed upon the goat-faced altar of Ninindava, after which the Pelinal used a plague spell to prevent him from reforming by welcomed magic. He would also go on to slay Fire King Hadhul on the granite steps of Seatar, the Fire King's spears being included for the first and final time. Pelinal experienced his first madness after the death of Huna, a citizen who Pelinal had raised from grain slave to hoplite and loved well, took death from an Aelid arrow. This broke Pelinal, who would descend into several flights of madness and would work destruction from Narlume to Cyrodiil and erase those lands from the maps of elves and men, causing Alesia to be forced to make sacrifices to the gods to keep them from leaving the world in their disgust. As the rebel army continued its uprising, they began to shift their attention towards the White God Tower, the greatest achievement of the Aelid Empire and their most magnificent structure. The Aelids prepared themselves, however, for their arrival, forming a pact with Meridia, who summoned her Aurorans from the Daedric realm of Oblivion, the Coloured Rooms, to serve them in battle. Meridia appointed the Aelid sorcerer king, Umaril the Unfeathered, as her champion, for he was half elf and half divine. Upon his death, his spiritual form would live on, and eventually reform in Meridia's Plane of Oblivion. And for the first time since his coming, It was Pelinal who was called out to battle by another, for Umaril had the blood of the Et Arda and would never know death. Pelinal would drive the sorcerer armies past the Niben, claiming all the eastern lands for the rebellion, and Kyne had to send her reign to wash the blood from the villages and forts that no longer flew Aelid banners. Pelinal broke the doors open for the prisons of the Vartak, with the slave queen flying on Morrowind above them. And it was here that she was called Al-Esh for the first time. Al-Esh is the name that was given to her by that of her followers, a title meaning High Highness, which would be corrupted over time by her Nedic followers to the name Alesia. As rebel forces began moving closer to the White God Tower, the Aelids attempted to blockade the northern bridge to the city, driving back Alesia's Nordic reinforcements. Enraged, Pelinal assaulted their lines and slaughtered all the Aelids holding Helden Bridge, an act which would become known as Pelinal's mid-year massacre in later eras. This consolidated the northern holdings for the men of Falkreath. It was here where he stood, with white hair turned brown with elf blood, at the Bridge of Helden, where Alesia had sent the Nords, and the Nords, looking at him, said that Shor had returned, but Pelinal spat at their feet for profaning that name. Once again, this suggests that Pelinal is a mortal incarnation, a Shezarene, of the missing god, Lorkhan, known as Shor in the Nordic pantheon. Pelinal led his army, now bolstered with that of the Nordic people, to drive the Aelids inwards, towards the Tower of White Gold, a slow retreating circle that could not understand the power of man's sudden liberty. Umaril sent his Thundernugs, Storm Atronachs, who would carry out incursions against the rebellion. And Pelinal, who with the divine artifact, the Mace of the Crusader, would crush them, and he would carry his injured friend, Morrowind, Breath of Kyne, who had fallen from a volley of birdbeaks, to the clever-cutting men for healing. Thus, at the Council of Skiffs, where all the rebel army and all the Nords gathered, they shook with fear, for with Morrowind wounded and the daunting prospect of assaulting the White Gold looming over them, fear took hold, so much so that Al-Esh herself counselled delay. Pelinal grew furious, cursing at Umaril and those of the men around him, who he believed to be cowards, and entering into another madness he made his way to the tower, alone, his eyes burning with anticipation and the thought of elven viscera being poured. It is said that there is meaning behind the red symbol of Pelinal's cuirass, that it was not simply ornamental, with some saying that beneath the Pelinal's star armor was a chest that gaped open to show no heart, only a red rage shaped diamond fashion, singing like a mindless dragon. Could this be the Kim El Adabal, the amulet of kings enshrined within his chest? In battle, Pelinal would laugh, swinging his sword, running into the reign of Kyne to slaughter their Aelid captives. And it was during these fits of anger and nonsense that Pelinal would fall into the madness, where whole swathes of land were devoured in divine rampage to become void, with Alesia having to pray to the divines for their assistance, for they would reach down as one mind and soothe the Whitestrake until he no longer had the will to kill the earth in whole. When Pelinal was asked by a friend what such an affliction felt like, Pelinal could only answer, like when the dream no longer needs its dreamer. As he entered into the White Gold Tower, the Pelinal was faced with a great number of battles with those of Umaril's allies, who had been sent forward by the Sorcerer King in an attempt to slow down and weaken the Divine Crusader. He did this in the hopes of establishing any chance at being triumphant in this battle. And so, after many battles with Umaril's allies, where dead Aurorans lay casting a gold candlelight around the throne, the Pelinal became surrounded by the last Aelid Sorcerer Kings and their demons, each one heavy with violence, a type of magic that enabled them to pierce the divine armor of the insurgent. The Whitestrake cracked the floor with his mace, and they withdrew. "Bring me Umaril that called me out," Pelinal said as he was struck by yet more soldiers who were being sent out to die. and yet they managed to pierce his armour with axes and arrows, for each was wrought with violence. The Unfeathered spoke of his father, a god of the previous Cowper's world river. All the while, Umaril was taking great delight as Pelinal exerted breath after breath as he was battered by the king's allies. The events surrounding the battle between Pelinal and Umaril was lost to time, with none knowing the true extent of the duel. However, the consequences are described in meticulous detail. And Umaril was laid low, the angel face of his helm dented into an ugliness which made Pelinal laugh, and his unfeathered wings broken off with sword strokes delivered, while Pelinal stood frothing above him, insulting his ancestry and anyone else that took ship from old Elnafay. This angered the Elvish kings, and drove them to a madness of their own, and they fell on him, speaking to their weapons, cutting the Pelinal into eighths while he roared in confusion, which even the council of skiffs, the leaders of the rebel army, could hear. The next morning, when Morrowind shook the whole tower, with might bashing from his horns, some Elves ran, and some were slain in overabundance in the taking. And men looked for more Elves to kill, but Pelinal had left none, save those kings and demons that had already begun to flee. It was the winged bull who found the Whitestrake's head, which the kings had left to prove their deeds. The two of them spoke, and Pelinal said things of regret, but the rebellion had turned away, and more words were said between these immortals that even Alesia would not deign to hear. And in the blood-flawed throne room of white gold, the severed head of Pelinal spoke to the winged bull, Morrowind, demigod lover of Al-Esh, saying, "Our enemies have undone me, and spread my body into hiding. In mockery of divine purpose, the Aelids cut me into eighths, for they are obsessed with this number." And Morrowind, confused, snorted through his ring, saying, "Your crusades went beyond her counsel, Whitestrake, but I am a bull, and therefore reckless in my wit. I think I would go and gore our prisoners if you had left any alive. You are blood made glorious, uncle, and will come again, as fox animal light. Cyrodiil is still ours." Then Pelinal spoke again, for the last time. "Beware, Morrowind, beware, for I know that my foe yet lives. Bitter knowledge to take to my grave. Better that I die believing myself the victor. Although cast beyond the doors of night, he will return. Be vigilant, for I can no longer shield the host of men from Umaril's retribution." Here we are, again. Whether you choose to believe or not, we are confronted with more signs of the Whitestrake's agic origin. How can a mortal man, whose severed head lay there on the ground, speak? It is because of this evidence, which further suggests of Pelinal's divine nature, that I am inclined to believe, with all indications, that this man was a Shezarene, or, at the very least, an individual of agic origin. This viewpoint is proven further, as despite the death of Pelinal, he was supposedly present at the funeral of Alesia, and spoke to her, describing another half, that along with himself, would take her up and reveal their true faces to her. What that could possibly mean, I will leave to your own interpretation. After the capture of the White Gold Tower, Alesia declared herself the first empress of the new Cyrodiilic Empire, establishing Sancre-Tor as her holy city. One of the first challenges faced in this new empire was the establishment of a religion acceptable by both the people of Cyrodiil, the Aldmeri pantheon, and to her Nordic allies who were opposed to any elven deities. As a compromise, she established the Eight Divines, which incorporated elements of both Aldmeri and Nordic religions. According to legend, Akatosh made a covenant with Alesia, and gifted her the Amulet of Kings as a token of this pledge and proof of her claim. His second gift was the Sublime Brazier, a powerful relic built in the Dragonfire Cathedral, which was instrumental in upholding the covenant through the lighting of the dragonfires. The Amulet of Kings, set in its center was the Kim El Adabal, was a huge soul gem that was. It served as the symbol of the emperors and of divine right. The soul of each reigning emperor was enshrined within the gem. In this way, the rulers of Cyrodiil were brought together in death, forming an oversoul that could provide counsel to their successors. The amulet could only be worn by certain individuals, those with dragon blood in their veins. This covenant formed with Akatosh also involved the dragon fires, which acted as a barrier against invasions from the plains of Oblivion. These fires would be kept burning throughout his or her lifetime, and represented the covenant between the Cyrodiilic Empire and Akatosh. The Pantheon of the Eight Divines remained as the dominant religion within the province of Cyrodiil, and with many believing, after events in the Third Era, of the addition of a ninth divine, Talos. In 3E 433, Umaril the Unfeathered had returned to Nirn to take revenge on the gods. Umaril's forces attacked the Chapel of Dibella in Andal, to which a prophet of the Nine appeared, preaching of Umaril and Pelinal, stating that the Nine Divines needed a divine crusader reborn. A champion would rise to the occasion, being sent on a pilgrimage by the prophet, after which the champion had a vision, meeting Pelinal's ghost personally above the White Gold Tower. This champion would go on to collect all of the Crusaders' relics, as well as receiving the blessing of Talos, enabling them to permanently destroy Umaril, for Umaril would finally know death.